The rain had been falling for 3 days straight when Zane Tucker rode out to check on the northern fence line. And what he found there would change everything he thought he knew about fate. The creek had swollen into a raging torrent, brown water churning with debris and foam, and perched on the slanted roof of what remained of a half-submerged homestead cabin sat a woman in a soaked blue dress, her dark hair plastered to her face as she clung to the chimney with both arms. The water was rising fast, already licking at the edges of the roof, and Zane knew without a doubt that in another hour, maybe less, that cabin would be swept away entirely. He did not hesitate. Spurring his horse forward through the muddy ground, he navigated as close as the flooding would allow, then dismounted and tied the reins to a sturdy oak that still stood above the waterline. The woman had seen him now, and even from this distance he could see the desperation in her face, the way her lips moved in what might have been prayer or simply exhausted mumblings. "I am coming for you," he shouted over the roar of the water. "Hold on." The current was vicious, pulling at his legs the moment he waded in. Zane was a tall man, broad-shouldered from years of ranch work, and he used every ounce of that strength now as he pushed forward through water that rose from his knees to his waist to his chest. The cold shocked his system, but he kept his eyes fixed on the woman, on the way her knuckles had gone white around the chimney stones. When he finally reached the cabin, the structure groaned beneath him as he pulled himself onto the roof. The woman stared at him with wide eyes, green as spring grass, and he could see she was shaking violently. "My name is Zane Tucker," he said, keeping his voice as steady as he could manage. "I have got you now. You are going to be all right." "The water," she whispered through chattering teeth. "It came so fast. My family, they went to town yesterday. I stayed to watch the animals. I thought I had time." "We need to move now," Zane told her, already assessing the distance back to solid ground. The roof shifted beneath them, and the woman let out a small cry of terror. Without thinking further, he wrapped one arm around her waist and pulled her close against his side. "Put your arms around my neck. Hold on tight and do not let go, no matter what happens." She did as he instructed, her arms locking around him with surprising strength. She was lighter than he expected, or perhaps adrenaline made her seem so. Zane took a breath, said a quick prayer to whatever might be listening, and stepped off the roof into the churning water. The current seized them immediately, trying to tear them apart, to drag them under and away. Zane kicked hard, one arm locked around the woman while the other fought to keep them both afloat and moving toward the tree line. Debris slammed into them, branches and pieces of fencing, and once something larger that might have been part of a barn door. The woman cried out, but her grip never loosened. Her face pressed against his shoulder as he battled the flood. His feet found purchase on submerged ground, lost it, found it again. The muscles in his legs screamed with effort as he pushed forward, step by agonizing step. The woman was saying something against his neck, words he could not quite make out over the roar of water, but the rhythm of it sounded like a prayer. When they finally reached the oak tree where his horse waited, Zane's entire body was shaking with exhaustion. He hauled them both onto slightly higher ground, but he did not let go of the woman, could not seem to make his arms release her. They stood there in the rain, both breathing hard, water streaming from their clothes, and for a long moment neither of them moved. "Thank you," she finally whispered against his collarbone. "Thank you. Can you ride?" Zane asked, his voice rougher than usual. She pulled back just enough to look at him, and he got his first real look at her face. She was young, probably around 23 or 24, with delicate features that were currently pale with cold and shock. But those eyes, green and clear even in the gray light of the storm, held a strength that made something in his chest tighten. "I can ride," she said. He helped her up onto his horse, then swung up behind her. She swayed in the saddle and he wrapped an arm around her waist again, pulling her back against his chest. "Lean on me," he said. "It is about 5 miles to my ranch. Can you hold on that long?" "I held on through the flood," she replied, and there was the faintest hint of spirit in her voice that made him smile despite everything. "I think I can manage 5 miles. The ride back was slow going through the mud and rain, but Zane kept one arm secure around the woman the entire way, and she leaned into him without protest. By the time the buildings of the Tucker ranch came into view through the downpour, he realized he had not even asked her name. "I am Zara," she told him when he finally did ask, as he helped her down from the horse. "Zara Lewis. My family has the homestead about 8 miles north of here. We only moved out from Missouri this spring." "Well, Miss Lewis," Zane said, guiding her toward the main house with a hand at the small of her back, "let us get you warm and dry before you catch your death." The house was modest but well built, the kind of solid structure that came from 3 generations of Tuckers working this land. Zane's mother had passed 2 years prior, and his father spent most of his time now in the small cabin they had built for him near the south pasture, preferring his solitude. That meant Zane lived here alone, though his sister Molly came by weekly to help with the housekeeping and cooking. He brought Zara into the kitchen and stoked the fire in the stove until it blazed hot, then fetched blankets from the chest in the bedroom. When he returned, she was still standing exactly where he had left her, dripping onto the floor, her arms wrapped around herself. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," Zane said, then felt his face heat at the words. "I mean, I will find you something dry to wear. My mother's things are still packed away. You are about her size, I think." Zara nodded mutely, and he realized she was going into shock, the reality of what had nearly happened finally catching up with her. He found one of his mother's old dresses, soft cotton in a faded yellow, and brought it to her along with undergarments that made him even more uncomfortable to be handling. "I will step outside," he said. "You change and wrap up in those blankets. I will make coffee." By the time he returned, having given her a solid 10 minutes and tended to his horse, Zara was dressed in his mother's clothing and sitting in the chair closest to the stove. She had wrapped 2 blankets around herself and was holding her hands toward the heat, but she was still shaking. Zane poured coffee into 2 tin cups, added generous amounts of sugar to both and pressed one into her hands. "Drink," he instructed. "All of it." She obeyed, sipping the hot liquid, and gradually color began returning to her face. The shaking subsided. Zane pulled another chair close and sat down, cradling his own cup and trying not to stare at her too obviously. In dry clothes with her hair beginning to curl as it dried, she was remarkably pretty. More than pretty. Beautiful in a way that made him forget how to breathe properly. "The cabin," Zara said suddenly. "Did you see before we left? Is it still standing?" Zane hesitated, then shook his head. "I do not think so. The water was rising too fast. I am sorry." To his surprise, she did not cry. She simply nodded and took another sip of coffee. "We had not been there long enough to make many memories," she said quietly. "Most of our things were still in crates. It is the animals I worry about. The chickens, our milk cow. I opened the gates when I saw how bad it was getting, hoped they would find high ground, but—" "Animals have good instincts," Zane said, though he knew as well as she did that not all of them would have made it. "Once the rain stops and the water recedes, we can go look, see what we can find." "We?" She looked at him with those green eyes, and he felt that tightening in his chest again. "You do not think I am going to let you go wandering around flood country by yourself, do you? Not after I just fished you off a roof." The corner of her mouth lifted in what might have become a smile under better circumstances. I suppose that would make your rescue somewhat pointless." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the rain drum against the roof. It was a companionable quiet, the kind that Zane rarely experienced with people outside his family. Usually he was awkward around women, never quite sure what to say or how to act. But with Zara, wrapped in blankets in his kitchen, it felt natural. "Right. Where is your family now?" he asked eventually. "My parents and my 2 younger brothers went into Porterville yesterday morning," Zara explained. "Papa wanted to register our claim at the land office, and Mama wanted supplies. They said they would stay overnight at the boarding house and come back this morning, but with the rain." She glanced toward the window, where water streamed down the glass. "They will not be able to cross the creek now. They are probably worried sick. Once the weather clears, I will ride into town and let them know you are safe," Zane promised. "For now, you should rest. You can take my room. I will sleep out here." Zara started to protest, but he held up a hand. "My mama would rise from her grave and thrash me if I let a lady sleep anywhere but in a proper bed after what you have been through. Please, I insist." She finally agreed, too exhausted to argue further. Zane showed her to the bedroom, a simple space with a large bed covered in one of his mother's quilts, a wardrobe and a washstand. He brought her fresh water and more blankets, showed her where the chamber pot was kept, and then left her alone. Back in the kitchen, he settled into the chair and listened to the sounds of her moving around in the next room, the bed creaking as she climbed in, the soft sigh she made as she finally lay down. Then silence. Zane sat there for a long time, holding his now cold coffee, and wondered at the strange turn his life had taken. This morning he had been a solitary rancher, content with his cattle and his land and his quiet existence. Now there was a woman sleeping in his bed, a woman he had carried through floodwaters and somehow could not stop thinking about. The rain continued through the night and into the next day. Zane slept fitfully on the floor near the stove, wrapped in a spare blanket, and was up before dawn to start the fire and put coffee on. He was scrambling eggs when Zara emerged from the bedroom, her hair loose around her shoulders and her feet bare beneath the borrowed dress. "Good morning," she said softly, and he nearly dropped the pan. "Morning. I hope you slept well. Are you hungry?" She nodded and came to stand near the stove, watching him cook with an expression he could not quite read. When he plated the eggs and added some bread and butter, they sat together at the small table and ate in silence for a few minutes. "The rain seems lighter," Zara observed, glancing toward the window. "Yes, should clear by afternoon, I think. Then we can assess the damage." "Mr. Tucker," she began, and he interrupted her. "Zane. Please, just Zane." "Zane," she amended, and the sound of his name in her voice made his heart do something strange in his chest. "I do not know how I can ever repay you for what you did. You risked your life to save mine." "Any decent man would have done the same," he said, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Perhaps. But it was you who came along that creek at exactly the right moment. You who did not hesitate. You who carried me through water that could have killed us both." She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "Thank you, truly." Her hand was small and warm against his calloused palm, and Zane found himself turning his hand over to hold hers properly. They sat like that for a long moment, hands clasped on the table between them, and something passed between them that needed no words. The rain stopped by early afternoon, just as Zane had predicted. The clouds began to break apart, letting through weak rays of sunlight that turned the puddles to gold. Together they ventured outside to survey the ranch. The water had receded enough to reveal muddy ground littered with debris, but the main buildings had been spared thanks to their position on slightly higher ground. "Your ranch is beautiful," Zara said as they walked the property line. "How long has your family been here?" "My grandfather bought this land in 1855, Zane told her, pride evident in his voice. "Back when California was still raw territory, built the original cabin with his own hands. My father expanded it into the house it is now, and I have been adding improvements since I took over running the place 4 years ago. You run it alone, mostly. I have 2 hands who help with the cattle, and my sister Molly assists with the house. My father is still around, but he prefers to keep to himself these days." He paused, then added, "It can be lonely sometimes, but it is good land. Good work." They walked in silence for a bit, navigating around the worst of the mud. Zara's borrowed dress dragged in the wet, but she hitched it up with one hand and kept pace with him without complaint. "I should ride to town," Zane said as they returned to the house. "Let your family know where you are. They will be worried." "I should come with you." He shook his head. "The roads will be bad. It would be better if you stayed here where it is safe." She gave him a look that was equal parts stubborn and amused. "Zane Tucker, I just survived a flood. I think I can handle a muddy road." He could not argue with that logic, and truthfully he did not want to. The thought of spending several more hours in her company was far more appealing than it should have been, considering they had only met yesterday. They saddled 2 horses, Zane's reliable gelding and a gentler mare that he used for ranch work, and set out toward Porterville. The 10 miles to town took twice as long as usual, the horses picking their way carefully through the mud and around the worst of the flooding. In several places, water still ran across the road, and they had to detour through fields and around fallen trees. Zara proved to be an excellent rider, sitting her horse with confidence and grace. They talked as they rode, sharing stories about their lives. She told him about growing up in Missouri, about the decision to come west after her father inherited a small sum from a distant relative and wanted to try his luck at farming. He told her about learning to work cattle from his grandfather, about the hard first years after his mother died when he thought he might lose the ranch to debt and bad luck. "But you did not lose it," Zara said. "No. I got lucky with some investments, found a good price for my beef, and managed to turn things around. It has been steady since then." "It is more than luck," she said firmly. "I can see how hard you work, how much you care about this place." Porterville was bustling with activity when they arrived, people assessing flood damage and working to clean up the main street. They found Zara's family at the boarding house, and her mother burst into tears the moment she saw her daughter ride up. "Zara, oh, thank God. We have been beside ourselves with worry." Explanations tumbled out as Zara dismounted and was swept into her mother's embrace. Her father, a weathered man in his 50s named Robert, shook Zane's hand with such vigor it nearly hurt. "You saved our daughter's life," Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. "There are no words, son, no words adequate to express our gratitude." "I am just glad I came along when I did, sir," Zane replied, feeling his face heat under so much attention. They moved inside the boarding house where Zara's brothers, Thomas and William, both teenagers, peppered Zane with questions about the rescue until their mother shushed them. Coffee was poured, and the full story came out with Zara doing most of the telling. Zane found himself watching her as she spoke, the animated way she used her hands, the light in her eyes when she described how he had carried her through the flood. "Did not let go of me once," she said, meeting his gaze across the table. "Not even when I thought the current would take us both under." "I made a promise," Zane said simply. "I keep my promises." Robert cleared his throat, a knowing look in his eyes as he glanced between his daughter and her rescuer. "Well, Mr. Tucker, it seems our family owes you a debt. I would like to discuss how we might repay you." There is no debt, sir, truly. Nonetheless, once we assess the damage to our homestead, I would appreciate your advice. You know this land better than we do. Perhaps you could guide us in rebuilding if what we had is truly lost. They made arrangements to ride out together in 2 days, giving the water more time to recede. Robert insisted on paying for Zane's room at the boarding house for the night, refusing to let him make the long ride back to the ranch so late in the day. Zara gave him a long look as they parted in the hallway outside her room. "Thank you again," she said softly, "for everything. You do not need to keep thanking me, Zara. I know, but I want to." She hesitated, then added, "I will see you in 2 days." "You will see me in 2 days," he confirmed, and felt an unreasonable amount of pleasure at the smile that brought to her face. The ride back to the ranch the next morning felt longer and lonelier than Zane had expected. He caught himself thinking about Zara constantly, replaying their conversations, remembering the feel of her in his arms as he carried her through the water. It was foolish, he told himself. He barely knew her, but knowing something was foolish had never stopped a heart from feeling what it felt. 2 days later, as promised, he met the Lewis family on the road north of his ranch. The devastation was worse than any of them had hoped. The homestead cabin was completely gone, swept away by the flood. All that remained was the foundation and the stone chimney standing like a lonely sentinel. The barn had partially collapsed. Fencing was destroyed for miles. The fields were ruined, covered in debris and silt. Zara's mother wept quietly while her father stood with his hands on his hips, his expression grim. The boys wandered through the wreckage, salvaging what little could be salvaged. "This is bad," Robert finally said. "Real bad. We do not have the money to rebuild all this, not quickly." Zane had been thinking while they surveyed the damage, and now he spoke carefully, measuring his words. "I have a proposition if you will hear it." Everyone turned to look at him. He focused on Robert, man to man. "My ranch is large, but I run it with minimal help. I have been wanting to expand my cattle operation but have not had the manpower. If you and your family were willing to work for me, I could offer you housing in the old foreman's cottage. It needs some fixing up, but it is sound and dry. Your boys could help with the cattle and the daily operations. Your wife could assist my sister with the house and gardens if she was willing. It would give you income while you save up to rebuild or find another place." "And what about Zara?" Robert asked, his eyes sharp. Zane's throat went dry. "She could help with the house as well, or with the ranch. I have noticed she rides well. We could use someone who handles horses as well as she does." There was a long pause while the Lewis family exchanged glances. Zane could see them having an entire conversation without words, the way families did. Finally, Robert nodded slowly. "That is generous, Mr. Tucker, very generous. Can we have some time to discuss it privately, of course? Take all the time you need." Zane walked back toward where the horses were tethered, giving them space. He stood there running his hand along his gelding's neck and wondering if he had just made a complete fool of himself. The offer was genuine, he truly did need help on the ranch. But he could not deny that the thought of seeing Zara every day had heavily influenced his decision. "Zane." He turned to find her approaching, picking her way through the mud. She stopped a few feet away, her hands clasped in front of her. "That was kind of you," she said. "To offer my family a place. It is mutually beneficial," he replied, trying to sound businesslike and probably failing. "I need help. Your family needs work and housing. It makes sense." "Does it?" She took a step closer. "Or is there another reason?" His heart was pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. "I do not know what you mean." "I think you do." Another step. They were close enough now that he could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes. "I think you have been thinking about me as much as I have been thinking about you." Since the moment you pulled me off that roof. Zara, he did not know how to finish that sentence. All the words seemed inadequate. She reached out and took his hand the same way she had that morning in his kitchen. I have never believed in fate before, she said quietly. But you came along that creek at exactly the right moment. You carried me through a flood and did not let go. And now here we are, and my family just lost everything, and you are offering us a lifeline. She squeezed his fingers. Tell me that is just coincidence. I do not think it is coincidence, Zane admitted, his voice rough. I think I was meant to find you that day, and I think I am not ready to let you go yet. Maybe not ever. The smile that broke across her face was like sunrise after a storm. Before he could second-guess himself, Zane lifted his free hand to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing across her skin. She leaned into his touch, her eyes falling closed for just a moment. My father is watching us, she murmured. I know. He is going to have questions. Let him. I will answer them honestly. Zane took a breath. I intend to court you properly, Zara Lewis, if you will let me, if your father will allow it. I will let you, she whispered. And I think my father already knows. He is perceptive about these things. Robert called them back a few minutes later, and the Lewis family officially accepted Zane's offer. They shook hands on it, and arrangements were made to move what salvageable belongings they had to the Tucker ranch within the week. As they rode back toward Porterville together, Robert maneuvered his horse next to Zane's. My daughter is precious to me, Mr. Tucker, he said without preamble. I will not have her heart trifled with. I would never trifle with her, sir. I give you my word. See that you do not. Because if you do, flood rescue or no flood rescue, I will make you answer for it. That is fair, sir. I would expect nothing less. Robert studied him for a long moment, then nodded. You are a good man, Zane Tucker. I could tell that the moment I met you, and I have eyes. I see the way you look at my daughter and the way she looks at you. I just wanted to make sure we understood each other. We do, sir. Completely. The foreman's cottage had been empty for 2 years, since old Pete Hallbrook retired and moved to Sacramento to live with his daughter. It was smaller than the main house but solidly built, with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a main room. Zane spent the days before the Lewis family moved in making repairs, replacing broken windows, fixing a leak in the roof, and whitewashing the walls. Molly came by to help him clean and was merciless in her teasing. A whole family moving in, she said with exaggerated innocence as she scrubbed the floors. And one of them just happens to be a pretty young woman you rescued from a flood. How convenient. It is practical business sense, Zane insisted, painting the bedroom walls. Oh, absolutely. I am sure the fact that you have been whistling while you work for the first time in years has nothing to do with Miss Lewis. He pointed the paintbrush at her. You are enjoying this too much. I am enjoying this exactly the right amount. It is about time you found someone, Zane. You have been alone too long. The Lewis family arrived on a Saturday morning, their remaining possessions loaded into a borrowed wagon. Zane and his ranch hands helped unload everything while his sister directed the placement of furniture and supplies. Zara worked alongside everyone else, her sleeves rolled up and her hair tied back with a ribbon, and Zane had to keep reminding himself to focus on the work and not on her. They fell into a routine quickly. Robert and the boys worked with the cattle and helped repair fencing damaged by the flood. Catherine, Zara's mother, took charge of the garden and helped Molly with preserving and cooking. Zara worked wherever she was needed, and Zane found excuses to need her help with the horses more often than was strictly necessary. She never called him on it, just smiled that knowing smile and saddled up whichever horse he indicated. They rode the fence lines together, checked on cattle in the far pastures, and talked about everything and nothing. He learned that she loved to read, but had left most of her books behind in Missouri. He learned that she was afraid of spiders but could handle a snake without flinching. He learned that she sang while she worked, quiet melodies that made something in his chest ache with longing. She learned that he had wanted to be a lawyer when he was young, but had set aside that dream to save the family ranch. She learned that he could not cook anything more complicated than eggs and coffee. She learned that he had a scar on his shoulder from being thrown by a horse when he was 17, and another on his hand from a knife that slipped while he was repairing tack. "You are a collection of near disasters," she teased one afternoon as they rested the horses near the creek, which had returned to its normal peaceful flow. "Says the woman I pulled off a roof during a flood," he shot back, and she laughed. "Fair point." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the water flow past. Then Zara said quietly, "I am happy here. I did not expect to be after losing the homestead, but I am happy." "I am glad," Zane said and gathered his courage. "I am happy too, happier than I have been in a long time." She turned to look at him, and he met her gaze steadily. "Zara, we have only known each other a few weeks, but I need you to know something. That day I found you when I carried you through the water, I promised myself I would not let go, and I have not. I do not think I can." "Then do not," she said simply. "I do not want you to." He kissed her then, there by the creek where everything had begun. It was gentle and sweet and tasted like possibility. When they pulled apart, both breathless, Zara was smiling. "I should probably ask your father's permission before I do that again," Zane said. "Probably," she agreed. "But I am glad you did not wait." That evening, Zane formally asked Robert for permission to court his daughter. Robert made him sweat for a few minutes, asking pointed questions about Zane's intentions and prospects, but finally broke into a smile and clapped him on the shoulder. "I already said you are a good man, Tucker. Just treat her right." "I will, sir. I promise." The summer passed in a blur of work and stolen moments. Zane courted Zara properly, with evening walks and Sunday picnics and carefully chaperoned visits on the porch of the cottage. But there were also the unscheduled times, the moments when they would find themselves alone in the barn or the pasture, when he would steal a kiss, or hold her hand, or simply stand close enough to feel the warmth of her. By August, Zane knew with absolute certainty that he wanted to marry her. By September, he had saved enough to buy a ring from the jeweler in Porterville. By October, he had planned exactly how he would propose. He asked her to ride out with him on a Sunday afternoon, claiming he wanted to show her something on the far edge of the property. She came willingly, as she always did, and they rode through the autumn landscape with its golden grasses and clear blue skies. Zane led her to a rise that overlooked the entire ranch, where you could see the main house and the cottage and the creek that had brought them together. He helped her dismount, and they stood there for a moment, taking in the view. "It is beautiful," Zara said. "I never get tired of seeing it." "I wanted you to see it like this," Zane said, "because if you say yes to what I am about to ask, this will all be yours too. Not just the land, but the life, the future we could build together." She turned to face him, her eyes widening as he lowered himself to one knee and pulled the small ring box from his pocket. "Zara Lewis, I found you when you needed saving, but the truth is, you saved me too. You brought light back into my life. You made this ranch feel like a home again instead of just a place I worked. I love you more than I knew it was possible to love someone." He opened the box, revealing the simple gold band with its small diamond. "Will you marry me?" Tears were streaming down her face, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said. "Yes, absolutely yes." He stood and slid the ring onto her finger, then swept her into his arms and kissed her properly, without hesitation or holding back. She kissed him back just as fiercely, her hands fisted in his shirt. and for a long, perfect moment, the whole world narrowed down to just the two of them on that hillside. They were married in November, in a small ceremony at the church in Porterville. Zara wore a dress her mother had made, white with delicate blue embroidery. Zane wore his best suit and could not stop smiling. Her whole family was there, along with Molly and their father and half the town who had heard about the flood rescue and the romance that followed. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Zane kissed his bride and felt like the luckiest man in California. They held the reception at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food enough to feed everyone twice over. There was music and dancing and laughter, and when the sun set, Zane and Zara slipped away to the main house, which was now their home together. "I cannot believe this is real," Zara said as Zane carried her across the threshold, another promise kept. "Sometimes I still think I will wake up and find myself back on that roof, waiting for the water to take me away." "This is real," he assured her, setting her gently on her feet. "You are here, I am here, and we have the rest of our lives ahead of us. I love you, Zane Tucker." "I love you too, Zara Tucker." They built their life together day by day, season by season. Zara took over the household management and proved to be even more capable than Zane had imagined. She helped with the books and the correspondence, managed the ranch hands, and still found time to ride out with him whenever he asked. The Lewis family continued to live in the cottage and work on the ranch, and gradually Robert saved enough to purchase a small plot of land on the other side of town. He and Catherine built a new house there, though they continued to help on the Tucker ranch regularly. The boys grew into strong young men who proved invaluable during cattle drives and roundups. In the spring of 1879, Zara told Zane she was pregnant. He responded by picking her up and spinning her around despite her laughing protests, then immediately becoming ridiculously overprotective. She tolerated his hovering with good humor, and their first child, a son they named Zachary, was born that December just before Christmas. Zane held his son for the first time and felt his heart expand in ways he had not known were possible. "He is perfect," he whispered to Zara, who was tired but radiant in the bed. "He is," she agreed. "He has your chin. Poor kid." She swatted his arm weakly. "I love your chin." Zachary was followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Lydia, and then 3 years after that by another son, Matthew. The house that had once felt too large and too empty was now filled with noise and life, and the particular chaos that came with raising children. Zane's father passed peacefully in his sleep when Zachary was 5, and they buried him next to Zane's mother on the hill overlooking the ranch. Molly married a banker from Porterville and moved to town but visited often with her own growing family. The ranch continued to prosper, and Zane expanded the operation until the Tucker name was known throughout the valley for quality beef and fair dealing. Through it all, Zara remained his partner in every sense of the word. She worked beside him during the busy times, advised him on business decisions, and kept their household running smoothly. But more than that, she was his companion, his best friend, the person he turned to with every joy and every worry. They still rode out to the creek sometimes, just the two of them, to the spot where he had found her all those years ago. The memory of that day had taken on a golden quality with time, but the feelings it evoked remained as strong as ever. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had not come along that day?" Zara asked one evening as they sat on the creek bank watching the sunset. The children were with their grandmother for the night, giving Zane and Zara a rare moment alone. "No," Zane said honestly. "Because I cannot imagine a life where I did not find you. It feels impossible now, like trying to imagine a world without the sun." "That is very poetic for a cattleman. You bring out the poetry in me." He pulled her close against his side, and she tucked her head onto his shoulder in the easy way of people who had been together for years. "I meant what I said that day. I promised I would not let go, and I never have. And I held on," she reminded him. "We held on to each other." They sat there as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple, the creek flowing past them with its endless song. They had been married for over a decade now, had built a life and a family, had weathered storms both literal and figurative. And through it all, from that first moment when he had wrapped his arm around her waist and pulled her from that roof, they had not let go. As the stars began to emerge overhead, Zane took Zara's hand, and they walked back toward the house, toward the lights glowing in the windows and the life they had created together. He thought about that young man who had ridden out to check the fence line on a rainy day in May, who had no idea his entire world was about to change. He wished he could tell that younger self what was coming, what waited for him on that cabin roof. But then again, maybe the not knowing had been part of the magic. Maybe he had needed to ride into that moment unprepared, to act on instinct and courage rather than calculation, to make a promise without knowing just how completely he would want to keep it. "What are you thinking about?" Zara asked as they reached the porch steps. "You," he said. "Always you." She smiled and kissed him, still able to make his heart race after all these years. "Come inside, Zane Tucker. Your dinner is getting cold. In a minute." He turned to look back toward the creek, toward the place where everything had begun. Then he looked at his wife, beautiful in the lamplight streaming from their home, and felt that same fierce certainty he had felt the first moment he saw her. "I just wanted to take a moment to appreciate it all. To be grateful." "For what?" "For the flood," he said. "For coming along at exactly the right time. For not letting go, for you." Zara's eyes grew bright with tears, but she was smiling. "I am grateful too for all of it, for you." They went inside together, hand in hand, and closed the door on the night. Inside, their home waited, full of warmth and light and the promise of tomorrow. And in the years that followed, they would face joys and sorrows, triumphs and challenges, but they would face them together. Two people who had found each other in a moment of crisis and chosen each other every day since. When their children grew older, they would tell them the story of how their parents met, about the flood and the rescue and the cowboy who carried their mother through the water and refused to let go. The children would listen with wide eyes and ask questions, and Zane and Zara would share glances across the table, remembering. Zachary grew up to expand the ranch even further, taking over operations as Zane gradually stepped back. Lydia became a teacher in Porterville and married a kind man who treated her like gold. Matthew showed an aptitude for business and helped modernize the ranch's practices as the new century approached. Zane and Zara grew old together, their hair turning gray, their faces gaining lines and character. But Zara's eyes remained that same startling green, and Zane's hands remained steady and strong. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party at the ranch, and half the valley showed up to celebrate. "Look what we built," Zara said to him that night as they stood on the porch watching the festivities. "Look at all of this." "You built it," Zane corrected. "I just provided the land. We built it together, the way we built everything." He could not argue with that. They had built their life brick by brick, choice by choice, with love and patience and hard work. And it was a good life, better than he ever could have imagined during those lonely years after his mother died. When Zane was 63, he fell ill with pneumonia. Zara nursed him through it with the same determination she brought to everything, and he recovered, but it left him weaker. He could no longer work the ranch the way he once had, and he finally fully retired, leaving the operations to Zachary while he and Zara focused on enjoying their grandchildren and each other. They took walks in the evening when the weather was fine, always ending up at the creek. They sat on the porch and watched the sunset. They held hands in church and danced in the kitchen when the mood struck them. And every night, they fell asleep in the same bed they had shared for decades, Zara's head on Zane's shoulder, his arm wrapped around her waist. "Still not letting go," he would murmur into her hair. "Good," she would murmur back. "Do not start now." When they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered for a massive celebration. Grandchildren and great-grandchildren ran through the yard where Zane and Zara had first danced on their wedding day. Old friends came from miles around. The church in Porterville held a special service in their honor, commemorating not just their marriage but their contributions to the community over half a century. At the reception, Zachary gave a toast that brought tears to everyone's eyes. "My parents taught us what love looks like in action," he said, raising his glass. "They showed us that marriage is not just a promise you make once, but a promise you keep choosing every single day. They taught us about loyalty and partnership and meeting life's challenges together. And they showed us that sometimes the best things in life come from the worst circumstances, if you are brave enough to hold on." Zane and Zara stood to acknowledge the toast, and the entire gathering erupted in applause. Zane pulled his wife close and kissed her while everyone cheered, and for a moment they were young again, standing on a hillside as he slipped a ring on her finger and promised forever. 50 years, Zara said in wonder when they finally sat down again. "Can you believe it?" "Not for a second," Zane admitted. "It feels like just yesterday I was pulling you off that roof." "Best day of my life," she said. "Even though I nearly drowned, mine too." They lived many more good years together. Zane passed first, peacefully in his sleep at the age of 79 with Zara holding his hand. His last words to her were the same promise he had made all those years ago, whispered but clear. "I love you. I'm not letting go. I will hold on," she whispered back. "I will always hold on." Zara lived another 5 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, the matriarch of a family that had grown far beyond anything she and Zane could have imagined. She stayed in the house they had shared, refusing to leave despite her children's concerns. This was where she belonged, where every room held memories of the man she had loved. She passed away on a spring morning much like the one when she had first met Zane, with rain falling softly and the creek running high. They found her in her bed with a smile on her face, and on the nightstand beside her was an old photograph from their wedding day, young and happy and full of hope. They buried her next to Zane on the hill overlooking the ranch, and the entire community came to say goodbye. At the service, Zachary told the story one more time, the story that had become the foundation of their family's history. The story of the flood, the rescue, and the cowboy who had kept his promise. "My father could have let go," Zachary said, his voice breaking slightly. "When the current tried to tear them apart, he could have saved himself. But he did not. He held on, and my mother held on too. They held on to each other through floodwaters and hard times and 56 years of marriage. They held on until they could not hold on anymore, and even then, I do not think they truly let go. Some loves are like that. Some promises are kept forever." The Tucker Ranch continued to thrive, passed down through generations, and the story of Zane and Zara became the legend that every child in the family learned. How a cowboy had found a woman stranded after the flood, how he had carried her through the water, how he had not let go. And in the town of Porterville, California, old-timers would still tell the story sometimes, pointing out the creek where it all happened. They would talk about the kind of love that only comes along once in a lifetime, The kind that starts with a rescue and ends with a promise kept. The kind that builds families and legacies and stories worth telling. Because in the end, that was what remained. Not the cattle or the land or the house, though all those things mattered. What remained was the story of two people who found each other in the worst of circumstances and chose to build something beautiful together. Who made promises in the midst of chaos and spent every day of their lives honoring those promises. Who held on when it would have been easier to let go, and who loved each other until the very end and beyond. It was a story about survival and courage and the strange ways that fate works. But more than anything, it was a story about love. Simple, enduring, unshakable love. The kind of love that starts when a cowboy rides out to check a fence line and finds his entire future stranded on a roof. The kind of love that lasts forever.